Hi everyone, my name is Gabby Powell, and I decided to discuss the Hess versus Indiana case in 1973. I thought it would be a really cool case to talk about, especially with everything going on. So yeah, let's get to it. And I tried to do a voice thread and it didn't work, so I hope this kind of goes with it, but we'll see. Okay, so a little bit of the case background. So during an anti-war protest at the University of Indiana School of Law in Blumenberg, there was an anti-war protest that ended up escalating to police ended up coming and stuff like that. And a protester, Gregory Hess, bluntly stated, "We'll take the fucking street again or later." And the cops arrested Hess, and he was convicted for violating the state's disorderly conduct statute. And Gregory Hess, Greg Hess, confronted the prosecution, stating that this was a very vague conviction, and it violated his First Amendment rights and other things as well. Later, shortly after he was convicted, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned his conviction, stating that it actually did violate his First Amendment rights. I found the original court documents from this case, and I wish you guys could see this better, but this is actually the protest that happened at the school. This is pictures from the 70s. These are students being detained, and this is a altercation between students and police, which I thought was really cool. I love photos from the 70s, so yeah, but it's really cool to see that there are still protests going today as there were, in the beginning of time. I literally feel like. Anywho, the arguments between the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution claimed that his speech was intended to incite further lawless action during this protest, so they believed that his speech was going to cause more of a altercation with more of the students and the protesters that were involved. However, the defense claimed that his speech that was in question was unconstitutionally vague, like I said before, and overly broad on its face. And not only that, they argued that this conviction clearly violated the First Amendment rights, which, like I already said, did. So let's continue. This is another picture that I found of, this is actually Gregory Hess in 1973 getting arrested. I thought this was a really, really cool picture because, really interesting in the matter of, because the police still have the same, protective gear on that they do have today, with the sticks, the hats, the things like that, and they're, carrying out this protester so. So I thought this was really interesting. I wanted to share it with y'all. So the decision of the court, so Hess was originally convicted by a smaller jury for violating the disorderly conduct statute in the state of Indiana, like I said before. And the Indiana Supreme Court actually confirmed the ruling done by the lower court, so he took it to the Indiana Supreme Court, and they were like, no, this was, this violated our statute, and, it happened like that. So after a few short years, Gregory Hess went and appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which actually overturned his conviction on the grounds that his speech was in fact protected by the First Amendment rights. And the reasoning behind this was stated that Gregory Hess's speech was unlikely to produce imminent disorder and did not amount to any fighting words. So that being said, they, his words were really vague, and witnesses, claimed that he was never trying to insinuate anything, and it was just more of a speech thrown in the air in a heated protest. So the Supreme Court did end up dropping his conviction, and I thought that was really interesting because in most of these speech cases that we see, they usually end up losing. And so, yeah, I thought this one was kind of interesting to talk about. This is an article from a student. I guess the local college that this protest was happening in, they have a daily student newspaper, and one of the students wrote an article of, you know, the strike and all that stuff, which was really, really cool. You can see they locked the doors here, and there's tons of students just standing outside, so that's awesome. So just like any other cases that we learned about and other freedom of speech cases, this one was in particularly really interesting because they used the clear and present danger test doctrine, and a local professor of law at the Indiana University School of Law in Bloomington, where this protest occurred, he states that the Hess versus Indiana case remains perhaps the most important modern affirmation of the famous clear and present danger test. I found that really interesting, but not only that, the clear and present danger doctrine was actually coined after numerous cases that came forth after World War I. And this doctrine, acquired by the U.S. Supreme Court, helps discuss the circumstances as well as the limits that are placed on the protection of the First Amendment. So I think that I think it's really interesting to see the different cases and how they are affected and stuff. And yeah, so to continue on with the freedom of speech, there's some other cases that have had similarities that, the First Amendment, protects, freedom of speech. So similarly in Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1969, this case was actually overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court and brought forth the incitement test on whether or not the First Amendment protection should extend to subversive speech. This same type of examination of the case was used for Gregory Hess, so they actually did use kind of the same procedure that they originally used in Brandenburg versus Ohio, and they were both overturned, which I found extremely exciting because I think it's interesting when the U.S. Supreme Court overturns cases and from like their original conviction. I think that's really interesting because obviously you see in some state governments or city governments, local legislator, it's just sometimes more bias and more, it definitely deserves to be looked over by the U.S. Supreme Court and stuff like that. So really thought that was cool. Another case was Schneck versus U.S. in 1919, and that was the most famous clear and present danger case that actually began the creation of the greater protection of free speech rights. So that was like the beginning of, like speech being protected, and it is a little difficult, I think, to have a doctrine like this set so long ago. I discussed in the discussions for this week actually about how the privacy rights, how those need to be, reevaluated because they began so long ago, and so much has changed. The economy, technology, politics, issues, social movements, a lot has changed, and I believe that like some of these doctrines, and actually a lot of these doctrines, should be, looked upon over again and, changed if there needs to be a change. So, and just some questions I want to throw in here before I close this presentation for you to just think about, or if you want to comment your thoughts on my discussion, please feel free. But a couple questions are, do you think that, like, during protests and during rallies and things of that sort, that that the freedom of speech and the rights and all of that sort should be altered, because in protests and in rallies, they are so heated and they are so, intense. I feel as if a lot of things are said and it's really hard to monetize, what a group of people saying, and how are you supposed to, pick one person who says, something as Gregory Hess said, or someone else who said something similar. So like I think the question that I'm trying to ask, like, is there a way we could monetize it better? Or if we did talk about, changing it for rallies and protests and riots and things of that sort, like, is there a way to, figure that out and realize that during those heated situations, yes, that we're protected by our First Amendment and we could say what we, want, but I think that we could possibly meet in like a happy medium, with both, allowing ourselves to be protected by the First Amendment, but also being, respectful. So I think that that's it. And if you have any thoughts, or if you want to talk further about like how the government could monetize that, and how and if you think that we should come up with different rules and regulations for protests, and so many people getting arrested and having situations like Gregory Hess's, so leave a comment, and thank you guys so much, and I really enjoyed all of your guys' presentations. Have a good and safe rest of your week.